Hi guys, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to our channel. And in this video, I'm going to talk about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint for Linux. Now, if you're watching the series from the beginning, in the last video, we have discussed about the onboarding process for Windows servers to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, whereas the core agenda of this video will be knowing how Microsoft Defender for Endpoint works for Linux. What are the components available for Linux as a platform? What are the prerequisites in terms of hardware, system requirements, and network? Then we'll talk about supported platforms, modes available, and then according to me, what is the three-stage process that you need to follow to make sure everything works on a Linux machine. Now, before I proceed, I would just like to cover two key aspects that you need to keep in mind, and this is related to Linux as a platform, and it is actually very important. So likewise, for Windows, we have two different agents which are used to onboard machines to MDE. Now, if I talk about Windows down level devices, we use MMA agent, right? Similarly, for Windows 10, 11, and 2019 and above, from a server perspective, this capability is built in to the OS itself, right? That means there is no agent which has to be installed to make sure the machine gets onboarded to MDE. But when we talk about Linux as a platform, I'm sure you guys might have heard about OMS agent. Think about OMS agent as an MMA for Linux. Okay, the purpose is same, right? But when we talk about MDE, when we talk about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to work, then what you have to make sure that MDE Linux agent is installed on the specific machine that you're trying to onboard. Now, what do I mean by this? That MDE Linux agent is completely independent as compared to that of OMS agent, as well as MDE agent has its own predefined configuration, which is scoped to capture some set of information which is required from MDE perspective itself. So in order for MDE to work on a Linux machine, you need MDE Linux agent, not the OMS agent. This is very important, so I thought of covering here in the key aspects section itself. Now, the next thing that I would want you guys to know, and that is using MDE with other endpoint protection solutions is not supported, because this is something which is for sure going to lead performance issues. But let's say there is a requirement in your enterprise wherein the other solution should exist, or you are in a phase of evaluating a product, then you can keep MDE in passive mode, the same concepts that we were applying for Windows, okay? But again, from a production rollout perspective, using two solutions is again not recommended. It will cause performance issues, okay? Now, for all obvious reasons, when it comes to supported platforms or when it comes to knowing networking requirements, I always recommend to read vendor specific details, right? The obvious reason behind that is that when it comes to supported platforms or when it comes to endpoints, this kind of information keeps on changing. There could be new versions which are supported, or there could be some new endpoints getting added for certain capabilities. So this is basically the link of the article that lists down everything when it comes to supported platforms, system requirements, network requirements. I will be sharing this in the description section. If possible, please read this article and you'll come to know about end-to-end details which are very specific for a particular platform altogether, or for a particular version of Linux altogether, okay? Now, from networking standpoint, let's say if you have very strong segmentation defined for platforms, that means you have different set of rules when it comes to firewall, or you have different set of configuration when it comes to proxy, and that too, it is platform specific. What you can do is you can go to this particular link, or you can open this Excel sheet to be very precise, and then just apply a filter to Linux as a platform, and then you'll come to know all the URLs that are specifically used for Linux as a platform. Some of them will be common, some of them will be very specific to Linux as a platform. So this is a kind of a check that you can also do. Now let's talk about system requirements, wherein it is recommended or it is mentioned in the official documentation that the disk space required is minimum 1 GB, but I would suggest you to have it at least 2 GB. When it comes to cores, minimum recommended is 2, but for all obvious reasons, I would recommend to have at least 4, specifically for servers at least, because if that kind of capability is not available, there will be performance issues for sure. Now for var directory itself, you need to make sure that it has at least 1 GB of free space available. All these recommendations are based on my experience in terms of configuring this and monitoring behavior on our Linux machine altogether. Okay. Now, the next thing that I would like to talk about is components. So likewise, Windows, we have AV capability and advanced capabilities like EDR, TVM, and different things which are available. Similarly for Linux as well. For AV capability, you can get MD-ATP application installed on the machine itself. And then for EDR and TVM and the other advanced capabilities to work, you need to make sure that the onboarding script is initiated and the machine is onboarded to MDE. Now from more specific information, if I talk about Windows as a platform, we had two different methods, manual onboarding or direct onboarding, or we can actually get the onboarding script deployed either through Intune, SCCM, or GPO. Similarly, for Linux as a platform, we have a manual method wherein 3 steps have to be followed. Now, this is exactly the 3-stage process that I was referring to, because these steps have to be followed sequentially in terms of making sure everything is working on a Linux machine from an MDE perspective. The first one is configuration of repositories, then installation of MD-ATP application, and then onboarding machines to MDE. Now, this is the manual method. I mean, you will be executing commands on a terminal and making sure everything is in place. But let's say you want to use management tools to automate these 3 processes, then you can use Ansible, Chef, or Puppet. But it doesn't matter whether you are choosing the manual method or the management tools method, these steps have to be followed sequentially. Now, what do I mean by this? That let's say there is an endpoint or a server, which is Linux, that you have to onboard to MDE. Step number 1, make sure you have configured the repositories correctly. Then you install MD-ATP application and then run the onboarding script. Now, if I talk about some more details related to these 3 steps, the first step, which says configuration of repository, is the most important one, because here exactly you are selecting the channel that you will be choosing for updates. So what do I mean by this? Or for the capabilities, to be very precise, right? So you can either choose Insider Fast or Insider Slow or Prod. Now, depending upon the channel that you are selecting, you will be downloading respective package, and the endpoint that will be accessed to download the package will be packages.microsoft.com. But then if you will look at this particular section, what I have done is I have mentioned the OS platform as well as the version and the channel that I'm going to use so that I can get the required repository. Now, once the configuration of repository is completed, then you have to install the GPG package. You have to add a public key, Microsoft public key, and then you have to install HTTPS driver if at all it is missing. Okay. Then the step number 2 would be installation of MD-ATP application. And then lastly, I'm just going to run onboarding script to make sure the machine gets onboarded. Now, onboarding script requires Python on that particular machine altogether, because the onboarding script itself that you will be downloading from the portal is a Python script. Okay. So this is the 3-stage end-to-end process that you need to follow to make sure your machine gets onboarded to MDE. So let's talk about a quick summary of this particular video in terms of what all we have discussed. So we have discussed about the basic theoretical part, which is related to MDE for Linux. What are the components available? What are the prerequisites in terms of hardware, network, and system requirements, supported platforms, modes available, three-stage process for Linux onboarding. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can onboard Linux machines or servers to MDE. So if you think that this channel is helping you to learn anything new, please feel free to subscribe and share this video with your technical community. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.